Hello, hello. Alright, so today we're back in Wonderland. I've gone back in and started puttering around with some of the background details, just sharpening things up where we definitely need to get going. I'll go ahead and do a quick zoom in on a couple spots before we get started with today's prompt of mushroom. So using some really light sepia, I've gone ahead and implied where the faces are for the Tweedles, so they're not just standing there being like faceless mannequins and being kind of creepy. They might still be kind of creepy. Anybody seeing like twins standing together from like The Shining might have that in their head anyway, but I'm not trying to make them creepy. They're a fun character group. So there's that. I went in and I did a little bit of shading on our Knave of Hearts on his face. I didn't cover when I did the update for his coat because I wanted to make sure that the hearts were a present theme for him. So I added some black hearts to the trim. That was a few days ago. I've gone ahead and updated just a touch of the contrast for our frog footman from yesterday. I realized that his face wasn't reading as having enough contrast, so I've gone ahead and redid his mouth. I used neutral tint for that. I've outlined his eyes with a slightly stronger mix of the quinacridone gold, and that'll help intensify the gold effect. I also used neutral tint to go ahead and indicate the pupil of his eyes. And then the darker mix of sap green with the Carbazole violet or Oxazine violet or Windsor violet, depending on which manufacturer you're painting with. The hedgehog did wind up with a very light glaze of raw sienna, just so it wasn't like a hollow void right there. I still have to wrap my brain around the quill effect, so I've left that for right now, especially at that small scale. I don't want it to be too busy. So for the moment, the hedgehog's not painted in, other than that loose bit of raw sienna. And I just realized I left some paint on my swatches down here. I want to put them up before I make a mess and lose them. So this was when I was doing a test of which version of sepia I would include on my palette. So I did a test for both the Daniel Smith and the M-Gram. Both colors are pretty. I don't know why I liked the M-Gram version, even though it actually goes a bit darker, I think, in mass tone. So it just depends on if you want a slightly warmer or a slightly cooler version. I'm going to turn down the volume just ever so slightly because the last track was getting a little loud. But yeah, the M-Gram is slightly cooler, slightly darker. I mean, you can work the Daniel Smith up to a pretty heavy mass tone as well. As you can see here, you don't have any bronzing or any shininess until you get really, really thick with it. This part is shiny down here on the M-Gram just because that is a small puddle of that paint, basically like a dot card. So there's that. Make sure that was actually in focus before we're moving on. Alright, so moving on. Here are all the main colors of the palette. I should probably zoom out a little bit. But this is the palette that I've been using, and it is way overboard. The Anthranoid Red, while it is a really fun, like, cherry color, it comes out red, but you dilute it and it goes pink, like a very pleasant pink. I like it. It's not as light fast as I would like, so that's where you see me talking about this crazy debate of reds, because I don't know which red I'm going to aim to keep on my palette. So, playing with that a bit, I did find a pretty good mix of doing Pyrrole Crimson and M-Gram's Quinacridone Rose. Those come out to be a pretty good mix. But I don't know if I want to go ahead and mix like a half pan or less than half a pan, because like I said, I'm using these all as half pans, and there's two paints at least in each pan, except for this one with the watercolor sticks. I have 3 slices of those in my palette. I will move that off. I want to make sure I don't leave that on my desk where it might get shuffled about. Today's prompt is mushroom. I did go ahead and start the mushrooms in a previous video when we were doing the caterpillar. And we're going to go ahead and keep making some progress there. I'm going to move the camera a touch, because I have my board moved a little too close to the edge of the desk now. And because it is actually a cradled board, that would be really awkward for me to have it hanging off by that much. Get caught up on things, so not good. So minor adjustment, as my whole cutting board is slightly slanted. I currently have 2 thoughts at once. So I have my cutting board, cutting mat I should say, underneath, and that's because I do also work on other projects in the same space, and I also have an actual like cutting mat, like dollar store, the clear plastic mat, and that's because I was doing some sculpting here, and I don't know if polymer clay would do okay getting to the cutting, the lower cutting mat with the grid. So that's been still at my desk because I do have a sculpture that I'm working on in the meantime. I should be putting up some progress of that on my social media. That's not something that I'm currently doing as far as streaming. I have been doing video of the sculpting process, and what I will do is I will go ahead and edit that down into a time lapse, so you can look forward to that in the future. Probably in the next month or so. And it might take me that long because I'm also doing the mermaid prompts coming up, so not sure when I'll go ahead and get to the editing, because the editing will be my next gauntlet of challenges, because I haven't really done video editing. So that'll be another new thing to find out. If anybody watching does do video editing, please let me know, what kind of software do you use, because I would love to learn. And if somebody out there is doing professional level stuff, I definitely want to know about it, so that way I can go ahead and learn from you. I'm all about the learning. Other small things that I was doing, well, I'm just catching up on what's going on in Wonderland. I got some more of the rich green gold off of the white rabbit. Feels like that is not wet paper anymore, that is stained paper. I think I still had pigment in my my scrubber brush. This is the Willow's Blender by Princeton Velvet Touch. It's one of their random brushes that went with a plastic barrel instead of the wood one, but it does have that nice beveled point I was pointing out yesterday, which is great for scraping back into an image to go ahead and push the pigment around a bit, but it is very likely to go ahead and mar your paper. So just word of caution. I'm going to try one more attempt to go ahead and scrub this a little bit just off of the ear, because I don't like how that's sitting quite so dark right now. I'm not finished with deciding the background, especially with these random splashes. I don't know if I'm going to try and paint around them. Maybe I should have done them a little bit later in the process. I'm not sure. That looks like that lifted a bit better, so we'll see how that dries. Anyways, more Wonderland adjustments. I've done a very thin layer of the Carbazole Violet on the Mad Hatter's face to go ahead and start adding some shadow. So we are getting so close to the end of the prompts, I want to be developing the rest of the characters as where I need them to be. So, we're going to be jumping around a bit, even though today's prompt is mushroom. We're going to be working on that, as well as jumping over to spot details while we're in different parts of the drawing phase. So lots of jumping around. This is probably why I sound like I'm all wired on caffeine because, well, I am wired on caffeine a bit. And also a bit excited to get into the process and see Wonderland finish developing. So far with the mushrooms, we have the main part of this Amanita mushroom, and that was with the Deep Scarlet, and then a bit of shading with the Pyrrole Crimson. Just go ahead and push that a little bit cooler, help that shadow go ahead and recede further into the background. These ones in the foreground, their caps were first a wash of quinacridone burnt orange, and then followed up with a thin wash of the Pyrrole Red, and just allowed that to go wet into wet, deeper pigment at the top, and slowly wash down towards the edge. So I kept that a nice soft edge to go ahead and transition pretty well. I think I will actually glaze both of these edges with a little bit more orange, just to make that a little bit more prevalent, because some of the Amanita muscaria mushrooms tend to have a more orange tone at the edge. And I'm also hoping that we have enough time to go ahead and lay in the neutral tint for shadows, and also bleed-proof white to go ahead and be our raised speckles on the mushroom surfaces. The lower part of the mushroom, I actually forget if that was... I forget if that was buff titanium and raw sienna, because the depth on this edge looks a little bit more like that might have been some really thin out neutral tint with something else. I'm sorry, I should have rewatched that video so I would know for sure, but I'm not too concerned about it. We're also going to add some frills, so we'll get to that. First off with our two, I left these alone when I realized that I was getting far too into these mushrooms, because I knew that that prompt would be coming up. So we're just gonna glaze these guys with some water. And both of them. I'm going to pull some of the water off of this too. I don't want it puddling, I just want it wet. I want it to have just a very light sheen, because I don't want the pigment to travel too fast. I want it to be very light across this edge. And because these guys are so small, I don't want too much moisture there. So right now I'm just blotting to go ahead and lift up this puddle. I don't want to use the paper towel to go ahead and blot with, because I would just blot pretty much all of it, depending on pressure. So, just to be gentle, I'm going to do one more pass to go ahead and dry up this edge just a touch more. And I see a little bit of puddle. Push that up top. So now I'm kind of taking the other approach. I'm just re-wetting this guy so both of these guys are at the same level. The first one kind of soaked up most of the moisture. Alright, now I'm going to try to tilt this so you can see the level of sheen. We're going to just work kind of fast. I have almost no sheen left. And it is not picking up in my light. I can see just a tiny bit of it, so that should be good enough. Right now I'm using the number 1 from Silver Sterling Studios, and just going into the puddle of Pyrrole Red that I already had sitting on the palette here. And I'm just gonna dot that along the top, and we're gonna see how that starts to travel. If I need to, I'll help the pigment along a little bit, and I don't mind pushing it around. But that little bit of water that we did earlier, that should help with giving this a nice thin wash. And I might have waited a little bit too long trying to show you guys that sheen. Alright, so in this case, you see how that pigment isn't spreading at all? What we're going to do is we're going to rinse our brush. Timing is so finicky sometimes with watercolor. So rinse the brush, pat it off just a little bit because we don't want this to be really wet. We want to just push it along that edge and go ahead and soften that up just a touch. Now this can introduce blooms and backgrounds, so you want to be careful that you're not really doing a bunch of water there to go ahead and lessen that. I don't mind a little bit of blooms, but I'm not trying to have that be the whole surface of this mushroom. There's actually not as much coming down as I hoped. So really I'm just re-wetting the edge of that one. I'm going to reintroduce the pigment up top, because now that should go ahead and flow a little bit more. That looks pretty good. I'm going to do the same with the other one, just a touch more pigment at the top. While it's still a little bit damp, and that's going to go ahead and float down just a touch. Alright, so we're going to let those guys dry a little bit. And one thing that I would have liked to do earlier was to include some frills underneath the caps of the mushrooms, and that's something that I didn't draw in. So we're going to see what we can do to go ahead and add some. Just a very light suggestion of I want the shape of the frills to be. This one actually has a bit of rich green gold under it. I'm not going to do frills on this one because this one is a much younger mushroom. You can see by the shape of the mushroom itself, it's still very round. So it would be less likely to have a whole lot of frills right now. This one I'm going to curl up just a touch. Alright, so that is showing up pretty good. I'm going to just hop over to Twitch here just to see what's going on. Alright, so moving along, we're still on that Celtic search results list. Only I'm not jumping back and forth on it right now. I didn't want to lose track of where I had been with when I was listening to it, because there's like 85 tracks that came up for the search result. So it's one of those things where trying to do what I can to just make a little nip at progress wherever I can. And so since I don't recall specifically what that mix was, I think it could be sepia and Quinburn orange. Or it could be the Quinburn orange and Anthranoid blue. There's a couple different mixes that could possibly be. But what I'm doing, I did grab just a little bit of the Quinacridone orange and just a touch of sepia. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go under where the frills are. Go ahead and just indicate a little bit of a shadow there. And then I'm going to redo the outline underneath the mushroom, because this is more of an illustration style. I am tending to outline most things. When you're working with realism, there really isn't outlining. You tend to use negative space to go ahead and help define your objects, so that's where your background really comes in. So putting in that shadow. And outlining. You know what? I'm gonna go a little bit darker at the base of the caps too. Just because that could have been a little bit darker on all of these guys. Alright, so we'll give that a bit. I'm going to try using the buff titanium to go ahead and lighten these frills a little bit, just because of their overall shape. They would be catching a little bit of light right around here. It'll help give them more of a round form. So we'll let that dry for a bit. At this point, I probably could start adding the shadows for where our spots are. I am going probably a little more realistic with the mushrooms than I need to, but in general, when it comes to like plants, I definitely do lean towards a bit of realism. What else was I up to? Did I do anything else? I think that was it for today's puttering around Wonderland. I definitely have a lot more I could be doing. So, fairly thin mix of neutral tints. There's the very slightest bit of gray, but this is to go ahead and start indicating shadows. I don't have a reference for this, I am just freehanding random little spots. I think I've gone a little too light. So I'm grabbing just a touch more pigment. I'm just going to tap that in some of these areas where the spots are. Because without a shadow, when I put the spots on, they're going to look a little bit odd. We can definitely go ahead and do the shadows afterwards, but I'm trying to lessen the chance that my bleed-proof white is going to lift. I decided that I wanted to do that instead of reserving highlights with masking fluid. It's something that happened really recently, but I had a bad experience with masking tape. Tearing the edges of the piece I worked on. It was on a different paper, a paper that was new to me, but it has me a little shy. These are turning out to be incredibly light. You know, I think I'm going to take a bit of neutral tint and still move that over to where my reds are. I'm going to rethink my shadows here. So I'm just mixing it in with some Pyrrole Crimson. I mean, the color value on the Pyrrole Crimson is plenty dark. I can use that for some pretty good shadows too. That has a nice bit of punch. I'm a little bit less worried about overdoing these shadows. That's something you can do anytime you're worried that you're gonna go too far with something like neutral tints. Go ahead and mix that with one of the colors that you're already using in the piece. You'll be less likely to go overboard. That's why I like having my iterative approach to like multiple points around the rainbow. So when I'm doing my color mixes, if I just want to lean it slightly towards a color, I can do that. It's only going to go up to this far. It's not going to go further. That's something that's really easy to do when you're new to watercolor and you're getting used to mixing pigments. Now, is it a good exercise? Absolutely. I don't have to limit my palette. I'm choosing not to. Oh. In a matter of speaking. I've used a lot of different colors of red in here because I'm specifically doing an exploration of red to go ahead and try to whittle that down a little bit on my palette. But as far as in general, you see I've used a lot of the same colors and mixes multiple times. So I do want to add that harmony to the picture. Just doing a quick check. These feel pretty flat right now. Basically the indicator that you're looking for, if your picture feels cold, when you go ahead and do that little tap, then you probably have it still a bit wet. So you're looking for it to feel at least not cold. Like room temperature, like you're just touching a piece of paper. These might be too many spots. I don't know. We'll find out. I'm going to grab just a touch of... you know what? Never mind. I'll do that shading later. Or will I? I want these spots to dry down enough for when I put the bleed-proof white on, because I don't want it to be stained by the red pigment. I want them to be nice, bright white. Or maybe like slightly neutralized, like maybe I'll mix a little bit of the buff titanium in with it. Something along those lines where it's slightly natural. But I don't want it to pick up the red pigment and stain it pink. I'm not going for pink spots on my mushrooms. You absolutely can if you like that combination. I'm not gonna judge. I'm not the biggest fan of pink. That's actually one of the really funny things about my red dilemma. Once I was introduced to how flexible the Anthranoid Red was for me, like I really wound up liking that color, and it's just a funny thing because I'm not a pink person. And I did find it handy for doing things like florals, because they can get like a really nice deep value out of it. They can also thin it out. It's something that you can go ahead and get deep colors for sorry. Oh, yammering, I'm realizing these edges are a little bit too hard. I'm going to wait a little bit for that to dry, and that's okay. That's why I'm doing this now. I was debating between jumping back to the frills under the mushrooms or doing this shading. I realized it would be a lot easier to do the shading before the bleed-proof white is there. So that'll have to wait a moment while we wait for that to dry. Getting just a touch more of the Pyro Crimson. And let's do a little bit more shading over here on this guy. This time I'm just blotting the brush, being really clean. Instead of going right to the water, just to round that edge out just a touch. And I probably could do just a little bit more on this one. That should be fine. So we will jump back to our frills. Just grabbing some buff titanium for that. Because it is closer to the ground, it's more likely to have reflected colors of earthiness. Oh, we're actually doing some pretty good headway here. Just a little bit near that edge. So I want there to be like high and low points. There's a subtle ruffle to that frill. Hopefully that is strong enough with the pigment right now. If not, I can do a secondary pass. I just want to make sure that we have some light spots going on here. Especially with this one having that rich green gold splatter that I hadn't noticed as well yesterday. Let's see how these mixes are turning out. They are still not quite as bright as I was hoping for. So I may go back onto these frills with a bit of the bleed-proof white, probably ever so slightly toned with some buff titanium. They're not quite where I want them, and that's okay. We will get there. See the shadows now, how that buff titanium settling. I might have actually just shaded them with buff titanium and just forgotten. That's alright. So we'll give that a moment. I'm gonna lift this edge a little bit more. This is still a bit harsh with Untitled Red. That's not what I wanted. Now I'm just wetting that. If I happen to pick up some of the pigment, great. If not, that's okay. Then I'm going to blot because this one edge is a pretty harsh line. I want that to soften just a little more. And now what I'm doing is I'm rinsing the brush really well. And then I'm going over to the bleed-proof white that's on the palette already. I'm just giving that a little drop of water. I want to have that soak in and reactivate all that pigment. While we're waiting for that for a moment, I want to add a little bit more color to the dodo. The dodo wound up a little bit washed out, so we're just going to sneak up here. I did a light glaze of the Carbazole Violet here, or Windsor Violet, or the Oxazine Violet, depending on the maker that you're using. I actually want to go just a touch more with that. I also want to bring out the just a bit more of the Anthranoid blue. So the Carbazole Violet, for being used as a shadow, is just going to make the character a little more interesting, a little more dynamic with that shadow. The Anthranoid blue is the main color of the character, though. I don't mind if this blends a little bit. That's a teeny bit strong. A little more water, blotting the brush just a touch. It's just one of those situations where you might not have a great idea of the color of the characters this far in the background and being drenched in light by the sun. But even so, I want it to be just a touch darker. I'll blend my brush, and at this point it is practically dry. I'm just moving around whatever pigment I can, but I want it to be very light still. I do want to do a touch more of the Deep Scarlet that I did on the end of the beak. Ooh. And my battery ran out. So, we're going to keep going. but I'm going to do a quick battery swap. Hopefully you can hear me still. It looks like the stream's still live. So, fun stuff. I didn't realize my battery was slipping there. Sorry about that. This is why I keep two, and anytime when one's in the camera, the other one is getting charged. So I will actually do that, and I will grab a quick bit of my beverage. So I'm going to do that live. We're still waiting for the and bit of Pyrrole Crimson to go ahead and finish drying, so we have to wait a moment anyway. So it's a good time to get up and stretch. I'm still here. I'm doing a quick check on Twitch. Alright, and that's currently in the middle of doing what it does. Don't see anything going on in the chat currently, and that's alright. We will go ahead and move forward with doing some highlights. So what I'm going to worry about first are the thicker bits of detail with the spots on the mushrooms. I'm going to go in with my spotter brush, and I think I will actually go ahead and grab the reading glasses too. We'll go ahead and knock out two birds with one stone. Make sure I can see what I'm doing. Anytime we're on this half, I'm a little bit further away from the work because of where the camera is. So I tend to just go ahead and wear some cheap reading glasses that I got. These are just, I think they were at the dollar store. Might have been a grocery store, I don't remember. I had been looking in a couple of different places for a decent magnification. But something like 1 1/4 wasn't quite where I wanted. I actually wanted like a 2 times magnification because I do sculpt miniatures sometimes. You can see while I'm placing the dots here that I am overlapping part of that shadow area. So that way we only have itty bitty little shadows. And just for sake of consistency, so I'm starting with the top instead of the bottom, where the frills are, because I do need to adjust the highlights there. But I want this where I have the most pigment and I'm able to get a really high pigment load. Do that first. I could always add more to the palette. I'm not worried about that. Just one of those odd preferences I'm realizing that I have. With all of these, I'm generally having the white spots slightly to the left of the shadow for that to be the high point, because our light source is coming from the beach over here. So it casts all of our shadows away. So the light is coming from above and to the left. We've generally followed that for our shadows here. I don't mind if something winds up a little wonky because, again, this is Wonderland. If there's going to be a place that doesn't follow realism, this is it. And I just got a fuzzy. I'm going to mute my mic a sec. Just go ahead and blow that one off. So it seems to have gone. I'm placing these down, basically just like little pats and scribbles. I want them to have random shapes. This is a very weird spot for me. Because, like I said, I do like a bit of realism with my flora. I really worked on a lot of animals. I've done a lot of figures. I think I might have done slightly more water than I needed to in these mix. These seem to be drying down a bit. Give it kind of a slightly gray cast. I might go back into these with at least another touch when I get a fresh mix on the palette. I think they're looking pretty good when they're still wet, but when they're starting to dry down, I think a couple spots up here are kind of gray. You have to let me know if it's just me, or if you guys are seeing it too. I don't mind them, some of it kind of graying down. I want some of this to be pretty vivid, so I'm just going back in with a couple tap taps just to see if the second layer will go ahead and brighten that up a bit. I'm not even rinsing my brush before we move down to the gills. I'm going to just pop in, touch a highlight in a couple little spots. Since the buff titanium really was working more like a shadow, I'm going back in with just the bleed proof white. See where that gets to. And time to touch up the little blob bleed proof white on the palette with a quick little stir. Let's see if my camera will focus on it. So it's like thick and gooey. I don't know if you can see it kind of dripping down. It's hard when you're right above the surface. You know what? I could. You know what? I can. Oh, I can only do that side to side with how this ball is mounted. Right this second. do I want to show that? I don't think it's so important. Just a very, very heavy color. Just like when you go ahead and first squeeze out your tube paints. It's a liquid, and that it will flow out of the tube, but it's also a pretty heavy body. You're not applying that right on your surface. So just moving that off out of the way. And then going back into these mushrooms. This time I did go ahead and clean off the spotter. I'm just putting it back in the water just enough so we can get this to go ahead and flow. The teeniest little bit of flow. No, that's a little bit too thick. Back into the water. And I'm blotting the ferrule. Do not want water dripping off the ferrule. I am being a little bit random in how I apply the white under here, because I want there to be a variation between what is highlighted, what is shadow. And by having that variation, it creates like a nice undulating texture for the frills of this mushroom. I'm going to get stronger with the highlight here. So like I said, that light is coming from the beach. I think they're pretty cute. I'm just hoping that I hadn't had the prompts backwards, because if today was supposed to be talking to Flower, then I messed up. But we'll get to them tomorrow. I've already started sketching them in, which I still have time. So I'm going to switch gears since the mushrooms are drying down. I'm going to give the caterpillar here a pupil. Just a couple days ago I went ahead and added some bleed proof white to his eye. And I want to go ahead and give that teens a bit more focus. I think I'm just going to go into some neutral tint for that. Though I could do Payne's Gray just as easily. I'm good. You know what, I will. Payne's Gray. I just have to do a little bit of a double take on my palette because they're both end grain paints on this palette, which means that they always look a little bit more wet because there's honey as one of the binders. So they dry down to a degree, but there's always just that little bit of shininess to them. So now he's got a pupil. I probably indicate a mouth a little bit. Specifically one. Well, I should phrase that a little bit differently. I don't specifically need him to look like a very anthropomorphized character. I kind of like the thought of a very alien looking creature. Maybe I shouldn't do a mouth. Maybe I'll just the hose for the hookah. I'll let that come down. Just a random little twist. It'll probably help if that's slightly more in frame. So I'm seeing we only have 12 minutes as far as the current live stream session, which tells me that our bitrate got really wonky. In the meantime, this has all been in the streaming software as one stream, according to this end, as far as like we're still sending the data, just the network dropped out, so this will be in a couple chunks. If you're a viewer on Twitch, you know, you can certainly go ahead and watch the chunks that appeared there, but to get the video in its entirety, you can go onto YouTube at 4 p.m. Every day after I've done the stream, and I upload the whole video there. So assuming there's no hardware issues, I've had the whole video on all of them but the first video, which that was a settings issue, my fault, and then a random bit for the rose did not get captured. And it's the most significant amount of details, of course, when I laid in the details for all the greenery and got into all the shadows. So we have this nice little rose vine going on down here. Yeah, and so I have deepened the shadows a little bit with a touch of the dioxazine violet. I'm debating if I want to do more, because the shadows aren't very soft, and they also aren't very hard, so it's kind of like I would want it to be like a very graphic pop, like either high contrast or more natural loose shading, so I feel like a little bit more could be developed there, shading wise. So since I've started doing a little bit of shading, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to do soft and semi-natural looking gradients there. We do have a couple minutes left, and in fact, I can go ahead and do just a touch of that now. We have this section down here, which has like no shadow on it, even though that would certainly be a shadowed area. Softly come in here. I did this with the Anthranoid Red, and now the shadows that I'm putting in, most of those have been Emerald Crimson. I'll go ahead and soften that edge. This edge. That edge. Oh, just bits and pieces here. I do want this to go dark. I tried having it cool off. I might actually go in with fairly maroon though. That has been a fun shadow color for me too. That and the deep scarlet. I don't know, I'm torn as far as reds on this palette. I was hoping that this would help me decide. Ooh, did we run out of tracks on this playlist? And yes we did. Alright, so I'm skimming back up to... I'm skimming back up to, I don't know where. There we go. That's the last track that I was listening to that I knew I downloaded. We'll just reset from there. Maybe I'll knock out two birds with one stone listening to that. Let's see. We deepen that shadow just a touch. Come back and deepen this shadow just a touch. This is where the Corvusol Violet was, and I'm going ahead and deepening those areas. With just a bit of the Early Maroon. Yeah, I was noticing with my preference for reds, it always winds up being tough for me to narrow those out on the palette because they are my favorite color. And you've seen me hop around between all of them. I have probably the most reds here, but I've only used a few colors, like most of our blues have been the phthalo blue turquoise with cobalt teal blue, little touches of Anthranoid. The greens have mostly been sap green, little touches of rich green gold, little bits of phthalo green. Oh, pretty good mix of greens actually. I've used about as many greens as I've used on reds, and I really do like green, so I'm not surprised. Her frog footman's definitely looking a bit better after adding the contrast. I'm doing a slight glaze of some sepia. I originally did this with neutral tin. I'm feeling like it's too cool. I'm just gonna go back in and do this little touch of a shadow. Some sepia instead. That looks a little better. Alright, what else can we go ahead and tap on? We'll do the rim of the header's plate. I've been doing a lot of the plates with like just the plate of a touch of the phthalo blue turquoise. I feel like maybe I should add some contrast and do that edge with a quinacridone gold instead. Gold edge on the plate. That'll pop nicely against the purple for his gloves. Let's assume I can go ahead and paint a straight line. I might add a little bit of the Payne's Gray as a shadow for the little divot that happens in the middle of saucers, and a little bit of shadow for the cake itself. While I have this bit of quinacridone gold here, I'm just going to do some subtle little dots in our cake. So I didn't come back and texture our cake here. Now, these are a little bit of a stronger mix than I normally would go in. I'm actually going to let these dry just a touch before I go ahead and blot it. Just a bit. And there you go. And this lifts up random bits, lets other bits dry down, so it gives you a nice varied finish. Originally, the rest of these cakes were done. Pretty sure I did those with raw sienna glaze. And it is a very light glaze. We need slightly more golden tones for them to really read visually as cake. The brush is a lot drier now than it was when I textured the cake. So I'm pretty much letting this sit as it is. Maybe forcing a little bit more contrast in some spots, like with the lemon. I want the golden tones of the cake to stand out a little bit better. That's a little too much. And ever so delicate balance. Sounded like talking about a nature documentary instead. Alright, so we have some texture going on with our cakes. I think I still have a bit of the Hansa yellow. Grabbing a little bit of plain Hansa yellow. Let's to go over this one cake where we got that raw sienna that was sitting a little too strong. So using that to hopefully soften part of this edge on the top section. And I went a little bit watery, and I'm leaving that puddle there. I want it to have a hard edge to indicate the outline for the frosting. So I'm intentionally doing that. What else? Oh, we're at time. Alright, so I blotted off my brush slightly after rinsing. Just doing that slight touch of Payne's Gray and a blot. Go ahead and soften that because I went a little bit strong with the pigment. But that's about perfect. I should do a little bit of a shadow over here for the cake and where the glove is. I'm going to leave that for now because that gold rim might still be a little bit more wet than I expect. It's better to leave it. This plate is probably wonky as hell. It looks like it's part liquid, like something out of a Dali painting. I should have refined that edge before I painted, but it'll be alright. Alright, just checking out our rabbit here. Doing the tiniest little wisp of some of the quinacridone coral with our neutral tints. That's now too much of coral. Where's the Dutch one? Just to replace it lifted a bit. I was pulling out the rich green gold before. I may go ahead and further color correct that in Photoshop. We'll see how it looks when the background's there, because it might not be distracting once the background's in. And speaking of, probably should have added some more depth to the mushrooms in the forest. That's going to have to wait until tomorrow. So I could have jumped around a bit. I think the mushrooms themselves are looking pretty good. I can do... Actually... a touch of Pinburn Orange. Just a touch more orange to the edge here. I know I wanted to do all these touch-ups before I did the dots. Going slightly stronger for this next pass on this one, just because the color was pretty well already set. It'll be a little harder to see. That should be good enough. Oh, I do see a spot that I missed. Looking at the way the spots are sitting. There's strangely no spots over here. I'll just do one. Let's break that up. And it's going up over the edge. I'll go ahead and apply a shadow under that one later. I'll just use the spotter and going very, very gently with it, but that was bugging me that none of these were touching the edge. I don't know why I did that, so that is fixed. Let's see. I will be doing a mad dash tomorrow, blocking in more of the background bits. If you do have an opinion as far as some of the places in Wonderland you'd like to see on the signpost, please go ahead and post those in the comments, and I will go ahead and see about adding those. I'd like to have some names for places in Wonderland to update that with. So it's been another fun day, and thanks so much for joining me. And as always, keep painting.